Welcome to Legal Tech Live, episode 110. I'm your host, Nick Rishwain. We're here tonight with Jack Newton. Jack Newton is the CEO and co-founder of Clio and a pioneer in cloud-based legal technology. He has spearheaded efforts to educate the legal community on the security, ethics, and privacy issues surrounding cloud computing and has become a nationally recognized author and speaker on these topics. He co-founded and is president of the Legal Cloud Computing Association, a consortium of leading cloud computing providers with a mandate to help accelerate the adoption of cloud computing in the legal industry. He's the author as well of the client-centered law firm. And Jack, I have to say, you've had huge success, but I have to ask right out of the gate, what's it like to be the second best looking bald guy here tonight? Is that difficult for you? I mean, we're both pretty good looking.
Not just second, but distant second. I feel like there should be a bald men of legal tech club.
We definitely have a real hold of this sector. So, Jack, I really appreciate you being here. A lot of people signed up to listen in tonight and bring in their questions. We've got an audience that is, lawyers and strongly or heavily even on the founder side in legal and justice tech, legal tech, etc. And, you've had great success in the space. And that's a story that a lot of people need to hear. And even less on the successes is how did you overcome some of these obstacles and the difficult aspects. But can you start us off? You were the technical co-founder. Am I correct? Of Clio, were you the technical side?
Yeah. Not entirely, but that's part. I'll rewind. Maybe I'll give you the condensed version of our origin story.
Yeah, please.
So I co-founded Clio with a lifelong best friend named Ryan Govro. Ryan and I have known each other since grade 3, since we were 8 years old. And always had aspirations of, well, maybe not always. We always had aspirations of having a good time together, and that evolved through like playing video games and stuff when we were in, junior high and high school into, hey, it'd be cool to build a company together as we, went through university and got into the workforce. And, back in 2007, when we really had the idea for Clio, the kind of nexus of events was really Ryan working at what is Canada's largest law firm, Gowlings, and getting to see how the internals of IT work in a big law firm and seeing, frankly, how IT doesn't work all that well at a law firm. And me, so Ryan was inside a law firm with the understanding of what was happening inside the law firm. I was coming out of completing a computer science degree and I was more technical, like more trained on the programming and databases and architecture, system design side of things. And what was really clear to me at that point in time, this was early days for cloud computing, but what was really clear to me back in 2007 was the cloud is going to change everything and it's going to impact a lot of different industries in a profound way. And what Ryan and I happened upon in Clio was realizing that, hey, the legal industry is not only one of the last industries to be fundamentally transformed by technology, but it's one of the last industries to be fundamentally transformed by the internet. And maybe this wave of cloud computing is finally the wave that is really going to help take the legal industry to the next level. And
we've seen this in technology with cloud computing, with mobile computing. We hear it regularly now about blockchain related or crypto related, right? So
exactly. And it's one of these, like all of those waves, kind of,
right.
You get 2 or 3 of these waves in your lifetime that you might be able to catch as an innovator. And, we back in 2007 said, hey, maybe this idea of cloud computing. And what I would say is we were almost 2 hammers looking for a nail. Like what we saw was cloud computing is the thing. Is there an industry that is really ripe for transformation with cloud computing technology? And it was through Ryan's work at Gallings and through mine and Ryan's consulting work with the Law Society of British Columbia, where we actually saw that solos and small firms, more so than other segments of the legal market, really struggled with technology and really struggled with running their law firms effectively, and honed in as that being the launch segment or launch demographic that we looked to when we developed Clio. And I, alongside Ryan, coded all the initial versions of Clio. You know, we were wearing all the hats, as all early stage founders do. You know, like I was doing tech support, Ryan was doing tech support. We were both doing coding and development. We were both doing marketing. You name it. We were sharing all the hats.
Excellent. So that is a really great summary of those early stages, which is a lot of the guests on the show come on early stage, and they're trying to just get their foot in the door a little bit. And so you identified almost before you necessarily had the product to fit the market, you really had identified the market that you wanted to serve, and then started hammering away on the solution that you wanted to provide them.
Exactly. And we saw, you know, it was as with, I think, many startup ideas, you know, a lot of serendipity in terms of how we kind of got the right ingredients and the technology and the needs, and some way of bringing those together in a really effective way. And the things that were, you know, we were just curious, and we kept asking the questions around why, you know, I talked about the Law Society of British Columbia, the LSBC. We worked with their director of practice standards to understand what the opportunity might look like. And we just learned a lot. You know, he told us, for example, most of the ethics and malpractice related issues that they need to deal with at the Law Society are with their solo and small firm lawyers. And we just kind of went through the 5 whys process. Like, well, why is that? And, you know, well, they don't have much in the way of human infrastructure or support. You know, if they drop a ball, if they forget about a limitation date, if they forget about a meeting, you know, that glass ball hits the ground and breaks. There's no army of paralegals and support staff to catch that for them. And then we asked, well, in the absence of that human support system, why aren't they using technology? Why aren't they using it? The natural answer seems to be use a practice management system. And what we looked at back in the day, back in 2007, was there's a dozen plus practice management systems out there. There was Abacus, there's Amicus Attorney, there's Time Matters, there's PC Law. You go down the list. And the answer was they're all just too complicated and they're all too expensive. And, you know, for us, that's where it became a really clear opportunity. That,
I mean, even at that time, though, Jack, weren't some of those Abacus trial matters were legacy systems even in 2007, weren't they?
Well, I think they were all legacy systems.
Yeah.
Like and that's when we looked at it, when we did the market research and we pulled these products up and demoed them, we're like, well, no wonder no one's using these things. Like I remember laughing out loud at the Amicus Attorney interface, which took this like skeuomorphism idea to the limit and had like a brass nameplate. Have you ever seen this product?
Yeah. No, I have not seen the
desktop metaphor was a literal desktop. And it was like the name of your law firm or your name in the law firm on this brass plate sitting in a, you know, what looked like a 1980s.
Yeah. So that's the interface
that was the interface.
Oh.
And your contact list was a Rolodex, you know, that you navigated in the interface. And, you know, again, these systems were expensive. They were hundreds of dollars of upfront costs. There was IT systems you needed to buy and support them. There was the IT guys you needed to hire to support these systems. So it was all just a lot. It was all very expensive, very hard to use. You had systems like Time Matters that literally, you know, didn't work out of the box. Like you had to hire a consultant to help you implement them. And this time and money investment for the typical solo small firm was just a complete non-starter. And what, you know, again, I was an outsider, like I'm a technical guy. I was an outsider of the legal industry. So when we had all these discussions, I said, well, this sounds cute, but how big is this solo small firm market? Like at that time, I thought most lawyers practiced in
like Gallings,
the big firms, in the Gallings of the world.
Right.
And you know, we probably all know the demographics. It's the majority of the legal market. 80% of the legal market is lawyers of firms practicing in firms of 1 to 10 lawyers.
Right.
Half of the legal market is made up of solos. So this was it was very surprising to me, but a very SMB market that really could benefit from a cloud-based solution. So that's
Excellent.
the
So
Clio origin story.
I like it, and it was and it was very well summarized. I like that. We'll get questions for those who are on the Facebook stream or those who have questions here in Zoom. We're talking, and for listeners in the audio later, we're talking with Jack Newton, the CEO and co-founder of Clio, Clio.com. Jack, I wanted to kind of dig in on the great origin story. But can you give us like 2 or 3 of like the major obstacles that you faced in that early stage, you and your buddy working on this together?
Yeah, sure.
Like, I mean, 2 of the ones that really stick out.
So one was we founded the company in 2008, and you'll recall, 2008, 2009 was the massive financial crisis, and we were trying to raise money to support this startup, and had just a brutally hard time raising money, because you'll remember, it's hard to remember with how bad things were, but people were literally concerned that the financial system as we knew it was unraveling, and
taking money out of the bank and
running the banks, all of that, right? So the angels we talked to, the VCs we talked to, would give us what was ultimately a pretty frustrating feedback, which was, your pitch is amazing. We'd normally invest in an idea like this, but we're just battening down the hatches and not writing checks right now. We're going to ride this thing out. So we had an enormously difficult time raising money, and that was one significant challenge. The second challenge was,
and how long did that stretch of raising money go on for? If that started in 2008, how long?
Yeah. Well, really, it started in 2007 when we started building the product.
Yeah.
And we didn't raise money until 2009. So we went 2 years of bootstrapping, ramen noodles, me maxing out credit cards, mortgaging my house, and raising money from friends and family to get this thing off the ground. So we did a combination of bootstrapping and being ultra scrappy to get to our first investment. And I'll tell you what is one of my favorite stories of Clio's entire history in terms of how we ended up actually raising money, was against this backdrop of hearing no from every investor we talked to, whether it was, we're based here in Western Canada. So we're talking to people in Alberta, we're talking to people in British Columbia, we're talking to people, from the eastern or western seaboard in the US, the San Francisco, Seattle folks. Nobody was writing a check. And then out of the blue in late 2008, this guy named Christoph Jans sends a cold email inbound to info@goclio.com, which was our domain at the time, and says he's an angel investor based out of Germany. He just sold his company to a big internet company and made a bunch of money. And he's now an angel investor and wondering if he might be able to invest in Clio. He said he just finished his first angel investment in a company called Zendesk, which is a group of four guys out of Copenhagen. And
they've grown pretty significantly too.
They're like, they IPO'd several years ago. They're a gigantic company, huge success story. So Christoph wrote the first check into this huge, like one of the biggest internet company success stories of the last decade in Zendesk. And he wrote a check when it was literally like four guys at a desk in Copenhagen. So very cool story with Zendesk. And his second investment was this strange company called Clio operating out of Western Canada. And the hilarious thing about this cold email he sent us is it went straight to mine and Ryan's spam folder. I think for a few reasons. Number one, it was like from Christoph at web.de. So it looked like it was this sketchy, German domain name. The title of the email, the subject of the email was literally like investment opportunity or something. And then he talks in the whole email about raising money and investing in Clio. And I think Google's spam filters just all went off and thought this looks like a Nigerian email scam. So it went straight to our spam filter. And in what I can, only describe as what would be a borderline act of God, Ryan, in some like weird moment, wondered to himself, I wonder what's in my spam folder. He was so bored, I think in some long webinar or something, he decided to go check his spam folder and saw this email from Christoph sitting in there. Now, the second part of the story that was amazing is that it so happened that Christoph had actually sent a follow-up email to that initial email because we'd inadvertently slow played him. There was this follow-up email saying, hey, I just wanted to check in. I'm really interested in investing in Clio. Can we have a conversation about this? Ryan forwards me, both the original email and this follow-up that came from inadvertently slow playing him. And I ended up having a conversation with Christoph, and he ended up investing in the company. So he led, in what ended up being 2009, our first investment round, put $500,000 into the company. It became eventually our $1 million Series A round, back when companies had $1 million Series A rounds.
Wow.
And the rest is history. And I joke sometimes with early stage founders, the first million's the hardest. Like raising that first $1 million was enormously difficult. And once we got that initial validation of one investor in the door, started seeing the product traction, we raised then $6 million.
That's also part of, right, other investors like, oh, somebody else is in, they believe in it, and they feel,
that's right. It's that
right,
first
that
check
game,
and it's finding the people that have the courage to write that first check that is so hard. And I think where a lot of founders give up, and it's a game of perseverance. You've just got to keep at it, because once you get that first check in, and once you're able to start investing in the product and see that traction grow, we went on to raise $6 million a year later. We went on to raise $20 million a year after that. And we, most recently closed a $250 million investment round
in 2018 or something like that, right?
Late 2019. And if you can believe it, it's easier raising $250 million than it was raising that first $1 million.
Wow. So that is a really great, and we have a founder over here on the Facebook who says that Jasmine says she feels a lot better after hearing this timeline, right? This 2-year timeline. So that was
time.
It takes time. And that was one of your major obstacles. Were there technical? And fundraising is always a hit on this show, because people are desperate to get fundraising and get people interested in their product. But how about on the technical side or the customer acquisition side? Was there anything you were facing at that spot in the early stages?
Yeah, I mean, I've got challenges of all stripes, it's just
okay. I only asked you for 2. I don't need you to do more than 2. I know
I could go on all night with the challenges we faced, and in some cases continue to face. It's just
those that stick out as like, oh, I know others are going through this, and this is what they need to hear.
So a flavor of what I would call one of our significant challenges that I think many founders wrestle with is how do you bring something new into the world where there's a lot of education to be done about what the product is, what it does, how it helps customers. And for us, one of the huge challenges we had out of the gate was introducing this concept of cloud computing. Like, again, rewind to 2008. This is like a generally accepted concept now. You and I are on a Zoom call,
correct,
over the cloud right now. Like this is just part of our daily lives now. But let me take you back to 2008. The iPhone had only just launched. This was a brand new thing in 2008. People were still walking around with their BlackBerries. They had mostly on-premise software. The idea of storing your data in the cloud, like Dropbox, had only just launched in 2008. So these were all really new ideas. And what we had to deal with was, number one, a lot of education around just, if I think of the typical experience we had pitching Clio at a trade show booth, and I've been to like every small town in America at this point at some local CLE, in a booth talking to lawyers about Clio. And back in those early days, half of my conversation would be spent explaining, like the first 5 minutes of a 10-minute pitch would be explaining what the cloud is. And then I could talk about what the product does and why it's valuable. And one of the huge challenges we had in the early days was both educating about the cloud and then dealing with the resistance to the cloud, the knee-jerk reaction and all the concerns around security and ethics, and is it okay to put your data in the cloud?
And we still see those pop up from
We
time to
still
time.
see those pop up, which frustrates me to no end, right? Like, you still go to conferences and there's tracks talking about, like, can you store your data in the cloud? I'm like, it's 2020. How are we still having this conversation?
Right.
2021 now, I guess. And the pivot we made, and I think the really important decision we made very early on in the development of Clio as a business, was around this security and ethics of cloud computing question. We realized we can either get dragged along by this conversation and have people throwing stones at cloud computing and advocating against it, or we can lead the conversation and become thought leaders in what the security and ethics of cloud computing for lawyers looks like. And really invested heavily in that. We started writing white papers. We started doing editorials in bar journals. We started speaking about it nationally. We went to every CLE we could to speak about the security and ethics of cloud computing. We even ended up forming this industry consortium, which you talked about at the beginning of the show, which was the Legal Cloud Computing Association, with a view to banding together, even with our competitors, and say, hey, like, the cloud deserves a place in the legal landscape. Let's go advocate for it. And at that time, there was even, as you might recall, there's bar associations issuing ethics opinions on cloud computing. And there was a really touch and go moment with the North Carolina bar, where I remember they were the first bar association to issue an ethics ruling on cloud computing for lawyers. And there was a bunch of on-premise vendors and consultants in North Carolina advocating for an opinion that would have said cloud computing is not acceptable. And we really went to bat with that ethics committee, argued what seems like, I think, a generally accepted truth today, but almost sounded heretical back in 2009, which was the view that storing your data in the cloud for your average solo and small firm is more secure than it would be storing data on premise. That the average solo and small firm just cannot invest in the technology, the tools, the security audits, the penetration tests, you name it, to actually ensure that their data is secure. They're further ahead putting their data in the cloud.
And my day-to-day job is working with experts, including IT experts, expert witnesses. And what do I constantly hear from the computer forensics in those? Most of the danger is going to be in the on-prem. It's still that way. Somebody coming in, putting the thumb drive in your, somebody who's in the janitorial staff or is paid to grab something. That's still the most dangerous thing.
I agree 100%. And one of the most telling data points you can look at to tell that story, you look at the HIPAA disclosure list of the most significant data breaches over the last few years. And all of the data breaches that rank in that top 10 list are data breaches relating to physical devices, people leaving laptops behind in airport security checks, people losing a USB key. My favorite story of the risks of physical computing, on-premise computing, was hard drives that a hospital had sent for destruction at a data destruction facility getting stolen out of the back of the truck that was on the way to the data destruction facility.
Right.
And it was something like the third largest data breach of 2018, I think, was the hard drives being stolen on the way.
Yep. Physical is still the biggest threat. It's incredible. Jack, I didn't want to cut you off there, but I can just see these people just over here on Facebook. They're all going crazy for this, and they've got tons of questions. And
sure, go for it.
Alan Rodriguez, who I think says you've spoken about the latent legal market. He wonders if you could share some thoughts about the most immediate untapped opportunities there.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe for our podcast listeners, you can describe what you think of as the latent legal market,
sure,
or
no
expand
problem.
on that a little bit.
Good to hear from you, Alan. When I think about the latent legal market, it comes from a data point that the World Justice Project publishes, telling us that 77% of the legal issues consumers experience go unresolved by a lawyer, meaning that there is an enormous, in that latent legal market, that 77% of legal demand is not being serviced by a lawyer. And then on the flip side, the kind of paradoxical part of this equation is on the lawyer's side, we have 80% plus of lawyers telling us, and this is from the Clio Legal Trends Report, 80% of lawyers telling us the number one thing they need to help their law firm thrive is more clients. So from the demand side, you've got this enormous untapped demand, and from the supply side of people that can actually solve those problems, you've got lawyers. Somehow they're not meeting in the middle. Any economist would look at this and say, "What's going on here? Why is the demand and supply side not meeting?" And I think that's my condensed version of what I think about as the latent legal market, which, by the way, the U.S. spend on legal services every single year is north of $450 billion a year. So that's $450 billion just on that 23% of the demand that's actually addressed by lawyers. So the back of the napkin is this latent legal market is $1 trillion plus opportunity for the lawyers that want to go figure out how to tap into it. And tapping into that, like the biggest opportunities, I think, to answer Alan's question are all about how do you redefine and rethink how you price, package, and deliver your legal services to make them accessible to that latent legal market. And I think where a lot of law firms, bar associations, aid funds get it wrong is think that the solution to this is pro bono, that we need to meet all the needs of this latent legal market with pro bono legal services. And that's part of the equation. There's a lot of people that are underserved, underprivileged, that need that kind of help to access legal services. But a big chunk of that 77% of the legal market is just the average American, the middle America that can't access legal services. And to tap into that opportunity, I think about things like subscription legal services as an example of the way we can tap into that legal market. Let's look at something as simple as wills, for example. If you want a will, you go to most lawyers' offices and say, "I want a will," and they'll say, "Okay, I'll give you a will for $500 or $1,000, and then I'll send you on your merry way and probably never talk to you again."
Right.
When you really understand what the consumer's looking for there, what they're actually looking for is peace of mind. They're not looking for a will. They're looking for the peace of mind that their family's going to be taken care of no matter what happens to them, if they die unexpectedly or whatever else. If you take that underlying need and you're empathetic to it, you start to think, well, maybe it's not a one-shot will that solves this person's problem that costs $500 or $1,000. Their life is going to change. Their needs are going to change. They might get married. They might get divorced. They might move from one state to another. They might have kids. There might be a lot of things. They might win the lottery. There will be things that change their life circumstance. That means their will need to get updated. And if I'm going to deliver that peace of mind, maybe the best way of doing that is developing a subscription will service that instead of $500 or $1,000 costs $50 a year, say. Now, the cool thing about this is you're actually solving the client's underlying problem. You're giving them the peace of mind that their will is going to be up to date and reflect their current life situation. You're also going to be making more money as the lawyer because the lifetime value of that subscription is going to be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, depending on how long the client stays around. And you're going to improve access to justice because there's a lot more people that can afford a $50 a year subscription to something than can afford $500 or $1,000 upfront. So to me, I think about unlocking the latent legal market as finding those win-win-win scenarios where you can help deliver the legal outcomes, you can help as a law firm become more profitable and more effective, and you can improve access to justice. And I think those kinds of opportunities exist all over the place. I think we see examples like what Aaron Levine is doing with Hello Divorce, for example, as another instance of what tapping into that latent legal market looks like, where she's
Yeah.
making divorces affordable for people that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford them. She's able to drive more revenue per lawyer under that business model than the traditional divorce model. And she's able to deliver better outcomes for her clients that otherwise wouldn't be able to get the divorce they need. So I think there's so many opportunities like that exist in the legal market where, take the design thinking approach, go understand your clients, understand their needs, throw all the legacy of how things are done today in the garbage can and think, if I had to do this ground up in what I describe as a client-centered way of delivering legal services, how would that look? And in almost all cases, it's something that will look dramatically different from how it's done today, but also unlock the enormous amount of opportunity that exists in this latent legal market.
And this is something that we've seen in almost every other market, right? Fintech has nailed this. You see companies like Chime and so forth trying to onboard people at the lower dollar amount, but have a lifetime of this customer.
That's right. And if you look at it, look around at the business models like the Netflix and Blockbuster comparison that gets made all the time.
Right.
One of the things that's not noted as frequently as it should be is it's not just that Netflix beat Blockbuster. It's that Netflix has gone and created a company that is 4 or 5 times bigger than Blockbuster ever was from a revenue perspective, even at its peak, thanks to the fact that it's expanded its TAM. The number of people that can subscribe to and access Netflix is far greater than the number of people that could access a physical Blockbuster store.
Right.
And I think you start thinking about legal services in that way. You start thinking about so many lawyers lock into thinking about how do I compete with other lawyers on that 23% of the market that is served today. And if
in my community.
Or in my community. And if you instead expand your scope and think about how do I go and deliver legal services to that 77% of the population that isn't accessing any legal services at all, you're not competing with anybody, and you're delivering massive value to people that are not seeing the legal outcomes they need to see. And it's rewarding work, it's high impact work, and it's work that can be highly profitable.
Excellent. And Lori asks, she's always curious about investment into service-based professional businesses versus SaaS/tech products. Curious if you have any insights into this. So the investment into service-based or professional businesses versus SaaS, right? A lot of generally everybody I have on the show is in a SaaS business.
Yeah.
Versus they're more scalable, etc. Do you have any insights on getting investment into service-based businesses? Or
I think if you're raising money for service-based businesses is hard, for one. Investors react allergically to businesses that have too much of a services mix just because they're not as scalable, their gross margins aren't as good, that they're ideally looking for pure play SaaS businesses. But I think what you're starting to see is the appetite around technology companies that have a strongly coupled services arm, where there's a bit of a pure play technology piece that can get applied, with other customers in other scenarios, coupled with a services arm. And sometimes you see investment happening in one of those vehicles and not in the other. So the prototypical example in the legal space is Atrium, which Justin Can's company, which was this law firm paired with a technology provider that was delivering technology to this law firm and eventually maybe to other law firms. Atrium didn't end up working out, so we didn't get to see how that model could work out. But I think it's an interesting model for anyone developing the pairing of technology and services, is to think about how you might be able to spin out that technology piece into more of a pure play SaaS technology product that might get applied in other customer scenarios. How do you extract that and make it more generally useful?
And potentially use that service as an added value or an upsell later on. Have the bring somebody in with the direct technology play, and then do that as potentially an add-on. Or
Yeah, or a spin out maybe is the way I'd think about it, and you can kind of spin out that technology. I think the alternative view is that, if you're able to use technology to supercharge a services business, maybe you don't need to go raise money for that business. The nice thing about a services business is you've got a lot more revenue to bootstrap, and you can use that technology piece as the competitive advantage that you're developing, kind of like your secret weapon in that services space. And you can go build a wonderful, huge, profitable, successful, services oriented business. You're just going to have a hard time raising VC to fund that. And it's
right,
just understanding like what funding model is most compatible with your business. And for that kind of a business where you've got the cash flow, you've got the inherent scalability in terms of the people in the organization that will help drive incremental revenue, maybe you can just bootstrap that thing to a great outcome.
excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic input. We had a question from another startup founder who asked, I'd love it if you could ask Jack tonight if he's open meeting one-to-one with legal tech founders. And if so, what's the best way to connect with him? Is that something you do? I mean, I know that you're hugely supportive of other startups in the space, and you do the giveaway at ClioCon, and
the launch code
and so how do people go about that, and do you take those types of meetings? I'm sure you're a busy man.
Yeah, I try to pay it forward as much as I can, Nick. I can't take every meeting that's
Sure.
asked of me, but I try to connect with as many founders as I can and be as helpful as I can. So drop me a line at jack@clio.com. It's my email. I'll happily respond to any questions sent to me via that email. And I'm on Twitter. Hit me up at Jack_Newton as well.
Excellent. Let's see what Waylon had to come in because he had to make the show about him. Mike,
Hey, Mike.
Mike has a question here. What would you do now if you were a founder trying to bring a product to legal that needs a lot of education? So, and he gave us some context here is, right, we all used to go to a Clio conference or ILTA or things like that, and now we don't have the conferences necessarily because of COVID, or we have them in a much more condensed version, so there's not as easy access to the vendors and exhibits, and so how would you do that if it's a product that requires quite a bit of education?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think some things have gotten harder and some things have gotten easier in this weird environment where we're stuck in for now. And one of the things that I think always works is tracking down the influencers in whatever your space is. Find the people that others look to as leaders in that space. The people that are, the thought leaders, the people who have blogs, the people who have Twitter accounts, the people that have, the
podcasts. Say podcasts, Jack. Thank you.
Podcasts.
Thank you.
Clubhouse rooms. Find those people that others in their space listen to, and try to communicate the value proposition of what your product does to as many of those people as you can. Attach them to it, and I mean, this was a playbook we used back in the early days of Clio as well, is just go find the people that you want to be talking about the product and make sure they know what it does. They understand the value it provides. Ideally, they even become users of it. And you're going to see that virality. You're going to see that network effect kick in. And I think it's one of the things that the channels we have today and where people are spending their time helps you amplify that message more than you could pre-COVID even, I think. Like, you can have a Clubhouse room with 100 people in it. You can have a podcast like this with thousands of people listening to it over the course of days and weeks, and get exposed to these ideas. And that's how I'd go about educating the market. And I think you see a lot of different legal tech companies using that approach to really great success, even in a COVID environment.
Interestingly enough, some friends who are in the crypto spaces, where the white paper has become the go-to, right? Like they've
Right.
reverted to the white paper as this is how we're getting information out to people. So it still goes back to content.
Yeah, I think content is another great angle. People want to, and I think this is especially true of the legal community.
Mhm.
People want to research. They want to read about what you're doing, and content is more valuable today than it's ever been. And if you're, especially if you're developing a new space, you're developing a new category, content is a super powerful way to define that category and to own that space.
Yeah, so there you go, Mike. That was a great question, Mike. You're the best. So Phil's got a question over here. I've got to troll him a little bit. Phil's got a question here. He says a few states have started sandboxes to give some space to non-lawyers to deliver services, which is kind of this latent legal market that we had talked about. Do you see a future for Clio offering services directly to the underserved consumers who can't afford lawyers or who are choosing not to spend their money there?
Yeah, I don't necessarily see Clio getting in that game directly, only because it would potentially put us, at some level of competition with our lawyer customers. But what we do want to give lawyers the capability of doing is to enter some of these sandbox environments, leveraging technology like Clio, and able to deliver legal services in a way that is competitive with what the non-lawyers are trying to do, or they can enroll the non-lawyers in what they're doing as lawyers. And I think the fundamental choice that lawyers need to make in these environments as they get deregulated and they have these sandboxes open up to become the new normal in these markets, they need to make the choice. Are we going to cede our territory to these non-lawyer entities that figure out how to deliver legal services more efficiently and better than we can? Or can we go solve that ourselves? Kind of own your destiny by being innovative with technology and realize that these sandbox rules are letting external parties enter the market, but they're also giving law firms and lawyers new freedom and new latitude to think about how they can deliver legal services in these markets, or alternatively, how they can fund those investments. You can bring in non-lawyer partners, you can bring in venture capital, you can do all these things that you couldn't in the old days that help you be more innovative in how you develop and deliver legal services. And what Clio's committed to, our revamped mission statement of transforming the legal experience for all, it is about the idea that we can improve access to justice. And we want lawyers to be a really integral part of what a new world looks like. And we think that foundationally, technology is a huge part of unlocking this latent legal market.
Excellent. Yeah, that's and I think that's fair. And Lori Gonzalez corrects us over in the chat. She says non-lawyers should not be a word. And you're probably right, Lori. I will call that legal professionals, because that's really what we're seeing with some of the sandboxes. Thank you, Lori, for correcting us. There is a variety of legal professionals who can serve through these sandboxes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or
And
legal services delivery.
yeah, and I think Lori makes a super important point. And, I think back to Seth Godin and one of the comments he made at our last ClioCon back in 2020 around the idea that consumers don't wake up with a billable hour problem. They don't wake up with a problem that needs to be solved by a lawyer in particular, by the way. They wake up with a legal problem that needs solved, and they don't really care how it gets solved. And we need to have empathy for what those problems are and figure out how we can deliver solutions to those problems in an accessible way. And if you just kind of reframe your thinking around that and really think client-centered around how you're designing and packaging and pricing those solutions to legal problems, it's the right lens, I think, to look at the problem.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Jack. I've kept you now 48 minutes, Jack. I don't want to, we've got a lot of other questions. We can't answer them all tonight because I know you've got family and a business to run. So maybe I'll ask if you'd be willing to come back in 6 months or a year and
Yeah, I'd be
maybe
happy to
share
come
some
back.
more.
And if there's a couple more questions you want to squeeze in, happy to keep going for another few minutes.
I'll squeeze one more in from Zoom here. Colin asks, as part of Clio's mission of transforming legal experience for all, how is Clio looking to leverage its influence to improve the legal experience for people it doesn't serve directly? And I think some of that was covered in your last statement of if we can help improve the access by and help lawyers to
Yeah,
serve.
I think it is really multifaceted, and part of our vision, and one of the reasons we kind of expanded our mission statement to think a bit more expansively about transforming the legal experience for all, is that there's a whole stack of problems we need to solve and approach here. We need to find out, for some subset of that 77% of the legal market that doesn't have its problems solved, they don't even recognize they have a legal problem. If they have a legal problem, how do they connect with a lawyer? How do we make lawyers more discoverable? How do we make them more easy to connect with? Those are all the kinds of problems that we want to solve over the long term. We want to see the cloud become this enabling technology platform that lawyers can do work from anywhere. You don't need to have an expensive AAA office space in downtown to deliver your legal services. You could be delivering legal services to clients in an urban area while you're out in some low cost rural area, if that's how you want to work. We think that the future of legal is going to be legal services delivered entirely over video calls and smartphone interactions and electronic interactions. Well, maybe not entirely, but mostly translated to that environment.
Who wants to go into an office to sign the retainer agreement?
Exactly.
Who wants to
Exactly.
do that?
Exactly. So you start looking at how can we take some of these embedded overhead costs out of the legal system, some of the embedded costs that make legal services so unapproachable and so unaffordable for most Americans. That's how you do it. And I think we'll see just a lot of automatic accessibility created around legal services when we lean into technology and lean into the kind of transformation that can afford in terms of how lawyers get their work done, how clients get their work done with lawyers, and how even clients find lawyers in the first place.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jack, so much for being with us tonight. Really appreciate you taking your time. I don't want to keep you because I'd like to invite you back in the future. Jack,
Yes,
how do folks get in touch with you?
Drop me a line at jack@clio.com. I'm on Twitter at jack_Newton. Reach out either of those ways.
Excellent. And the website is Clio.com, CLIO.com. For those who might be unfamiliar, I can't imagine you're out there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Jack, don't disappear when we stop recording. I'll give you a little follow-up. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned. And thanks, Jack, for being here
Thanks for having me, Nick.
on April Fool's, nonetheless. And
on
it wasn't
April
a
Fools.
joke.
Thanks for all the great questions from the audience. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks all. Have a good evening.